like just like question along the way. We're just going to try and keep this as interactive as we can, so that in case if you guys have any questions, just go about it. Okay, so I'll be using one of my projects as I mentioned before. Okay, so this was my thesis project at Indus, and I was working with the idea of enhancing cognition through architecture. And I looked into, after my basic process of developing the whole idea and what I want to do and how I want to go about it, I came up with the concept of basically doing something, because I was talking about cognition. So my main focus went into developing a space for students, right? And then it was really up to me, what age group would I be catering to, right? Since I am from Hyderabad and I grew up in Jamshoro, which is also known as the city of universities, so I was like, maybe I could work around with that site. Okay. So I was working with the idea of, how does one in can how can one enhance cognition through architecture using biophilia or the love for nature as means for it. Okay, so I was studying natural spaces and how basically one feels within a natural space, what is the spatial configuration, the form and atmosphere of a natural space, and how can one basically recreate that experience of nature into architecture without really using nature in its you know in its basic form. So basically an architectural experience that feels sensorially, uh, in terms of senses, uh, more relatable to nature, right? There's like, there's a reason why all these artists, writers, and people who are working with creative fields, they usually go up into the mountains, sit by the lake, and they always prefer being around nature, right? They want to disconnect from the city life. So what was it about nature that was basically giving them that idea and that space and the time to be able to touch upon their creative aspects, right? And then, as mentioned before, why I picked up Jamshoro, because it's also known as the city of universities. And then my basic site analysis. Now obviously, to understand how many people or the number of students I'm catering to, I need to know that. Oh, I'm so sorry, I thought my screen was sharing. You guys should have just told me, and I was just speaking about it through the whole thing. Yeah. So, so I picked up my site in Jamshoro because it's also known as the city of universities, and now to develop a program and to know the number of students that I'd be catering to, or how big my space has to be, I really need to understand what are the demographics of that space like, right? So I did a study of, let's so I did a basic study of how many students are there in the whole city of Jamshoro over there. So there are basically three universities there: Mehran University, Sindh
Yeah.
University, and uh, Lumps University. But I wasn't catering to Lumps University because it was further apart. So within my site, the locality that I had chosen, the University of Mehran and Sindh University were right there. So I did a very quick study. I went to the universities. I had them, like, I asked them कि भाई उनके पास कितने students पढ़ रहे हैं. So the total number of students in Mehran University were 67,000 students, right? And in Sindh University there were 24,000 students. Undergraduates being for 56,000, postgraduates being 10,000, and doctoral being 700 in Mehran University, and similarly in Sindh University ke bhi jo bhi demographics there, right? And then I was also looking at that how many number of students are living in Jamshoro, because like a lot of students in these universities, they come from different cities, they come from interior Sindh, they're coming from Hyderabad, they're coming from a lot of spaces. So I wanted to really, first of all, understand the number of people that are living there, who would be on site throughout the day, and the number of people who are coming from different cities who are going to be there just throughout the day. Right now, once I had all the number of students along, like I had the idea, the exact number of students, I had to obviously look up to a precedence, or see, how do I basically start calculating कि मुझे कितने बच्चों के लिए कितनी space देनी होगी. So I looked up at Birmingham Youth Center. Now, Birmingham is also known as the city of university in the states, right? So now, वहाँ पे Birmingham में जो है total है 5 universities. Can you guys see my mouse cursor?
Yes.
Okay, great. ठीक है. So there are a total of 5 universities over there, and a total number of students over there were 155,000 students. ठीक है. तो और Birmingham Youth Center जो है वो cater करता है 850 plus students को. Obviously, like I studied these through Arch Daily and different architectural websites over the internet. और जब मुझे इनका एक exactly ratio पता चल गया कि the Birmingham Youth Center is catering to a total number of 145,000 students, and it accommodates 850 students within the youth center. So I had a ratio of 170.5. Calculating my number of students in the city of Jamshoro, I used my undergraduate students as a reference because I was designing for that age group. And then using that ratio of 170.5 students, I took out a ratio of 448 students for my youth center. So I had an approximate of 450 students. So now I know that my spaces in total are supposed to cater to 450 students, and I had a precedence, the Birmingham Youth Center, to back up my point. Okay, this is the process how I've decided कि मैं इतने लोगों को cater करूँगा. ठीक है. Now once I had a number of students पूरे develop मेरे पास, तो I started to see कि भाई, because obviously now the amphitheater space जो भी मैंने पूरा अपना program develop किया throughout the study, now I had to decide कि भाई, now how big these spaces have to be within my complex or my youth center. Now an amphitheater space would obviously at a point be catering to a total of students जिनके लिए मैं बना रहा हूँ, right? So I using time saver standards, 14.5 square feet per person, idea आ गया उसका. ठीक है, catering to 450 students. So I knew that my amphitheater space is going to be approximately 6,500 square feet of area. Similarly, multi-purpose space is obviously going to again at some point be catering to a total of 450 students, a max students, right? तो उसका भी फिर मैंने calculation करके using time saver standards के 9 square feet per person चाहिए आपको उसकी space. So a total of 4,000 approximately आपकी space. And then similarly, using the Birmingham Youth Center, I studied their admin spaces, and then using that, I started developing each and every space using time saver standards. वो सारे मैंने उसकी spaces started, मैंने उसको calculate करना शुरू कर दिया. ठीक है. And then similarly going on, wherever I felt like I'd be requiring a circulation space within seating spaces around it, तो मैंने 30% of उसकी calculations करके और वो सारी spaces मैंने वो कर ली, right? Now because I was designing a youth center, my main spaces were mainly going to be about how these students are going to interact. So I also studied all my जितनी भी मेरी गेम्स थी या जो कुछ भी स्पेसेस में स्प्रेड आउट होंगी, मैंने उन सारी चीज़ों को भी स्टडी किया कि वो कितनी स्पेसेस लेंगे ऑन लाइक all of these equipments that are going to go into my recreational spaces, उनकी क्या space होगी, और फिर using all of that, I developed an idea of space कि मेरा recreational space में वो कितना जाएगा. ठीक है. So after doing that, once, well, before moving on to calculating my exact programs कि कौन सी space क्या होगी, I developed a detailed uh, पूरा वो अपनी program, and divided that all the spaces. So for example, if I talk about the admin space, तो obviously उसमें एक reception space आएगा, manager आएगा, assistant's office आएगी, account, lounge, toilets and everything. Using Birmingham again as a precedence, I started calculating on सबकी spaces accordingly. So once I had all of these spaces की exact वो dimensions and everything, just let me, little bit unorganized because you guys informed it to me on a very short notice. So yeah. ठीक है. तो बेसिकली यूजर सिलेक्शन जो मैं पूरी बात कर रहा था तुम लोगों से कि किस तरीके से स्टार्टेड स्टडिंग कि कितनी मेरी टोटल पॉपुलेशन ऑफ स्टूडेंट्स है, एंड हम वो सारा उसको कैलकुलेट करने के बाद after doing an analysis and all of that, I did all this, the entire study कि मेरे कितने लोग आएंगे and everything. Now मेरी जो presidencies थी, uh, yeah, there you go. So now using my precedences, I was looking at this precedence, a youth center in China for my space relationship diagrams, right? Now, obviously, there are going to be some precedences that, we study to, so I was looking at multiple precedencies, right? So there was one precedence that I was looking up to study the conceptual aspect of my whole idea. Then there was a precedent studies that I was doing to study my environmental, how my, what are the environmental conditions, and what kind of geographical conditions I'm catering to, and what should my architecture be, so that my how am I going to respond to the environment and the climatic conditions. I was looking at that separately, and then one precedence to to support my conceptual studies, and my notions and my ideas that had to do with my concept. And then there was a precedence that was studying to see my space relationship diagrams that are basically directly proportionate to your programs, right? So I started looking at how all of these spaces that had initially developed through Birmingham Youth Center, मैं देख रहा था कि अब मैं इन सब spaces की आपस में relationship क्या होगी. So using that precedence and how spaces are working within that, मैंने उसका diagram बनाया. ठीक है कि वो सब चीज़ें spaces आपस में कैसे relate हो रही हैं, what space is connecting to what space, कौन सी space like how are they, what kind of visual transparency or what kind of levels of privacy I'm looking at. तो उस सब की मैंने स्टडीज़ की, ठीक है, separately. And then using all of that information, I developed my very basic, what do we call it, a bubble diagram in form of a very, in a very orthogonal way, where my communal spaces were like right in the center, and then all these spaces that were catering to, that were basically opening into these communal spaces, were all around it, right? So my jury, or my teachers, they had an idea of what my final design is going to be like in respect to my conceptual studies, my environmental studies, and in respect to my programmatic analysis and my program function that had to do with my project in itself, right? So once I had all of these studies like right up front of me, कि मेरे पास सारा मुझे एक exact idea पता चल गया कि basically a diagram that's showing me what steps I'm going to take into translating all of that into my design strategies, वो मेरी एक पूरी base layer set हो गई, ठीक है. And then after that, my so as initially I spoke to you guys about, I think my presentation was not open at the time. So I was basically studying the spatial configuration, form, and atmosphere of nature, and then translating that experience of nature into architectural spatial configuration, form, and atmosphere. Now for the atmosphere of any space, you need to have a form, right? If I want a colder, अगर मैं एक ठंडी space बनाना चाह रहा हूँ, or for example if I'm trying to make a space that's supposed to be warm, I need to give it some kind of form around it to basically hold that atmosphere. And then for that form to basically interact with other forms around it, I had spatial configurations, right? तो मैंने सबसे पहले nature का atmosphere study किया, फिर मैंने nature का form study किया, and then I studied the spatial configuration of nature, right? And now to translate all these three into my architecture, I started working with the idea of going using my spatial configuration as the first step. Why? Because basically if you look at this diagram over here, that's my bubble diagram is basically a representation of my spatial configuration in form of a diagram, right? So now that I had a diagram to tell me what my spatial configuration was going to be like, using my conceptual studies, initially my precedences and my site, जो भी मेरी site की studies थी, उसके हिसाब से मैंने अपनी spatial configuration वो की, ठीक है ना. For I'm just going to quickly wrap this up talking about prospect, that how in nature, for example in a jungle, you can see through the trees, but then there's a limit you can see through, right? So the idea of refuge coming inside that. For example, if you take the idea of desert, you can look in miles in a desert, but then there are always these dunes that basically give you refuge through climatic conditions, right? So वो पूरी मैंने study की, and then the idea of mystery in nature and all of that, and then I started developing all my my research in the process, that all the information that I'd mined into my uh, architectural representation of what how these studies of nature are going to be translated into architecture, right? And then besides not just focusing on my concept, I was also looking at my site as well, in those three steps that I initially spoke to you guys about: spatial configuration, form, and your atmosphere, right? So now when I once knew my strategies for my spatial configurations, I came down to the form, right? कि अब मेरा I exactly know what my how I'm going to configure my spaces around, using the diagram that I developed, using the space program that I developed initially, उसको इस्तेमाल करते हुए मैं form पे आया. So now the reason, I'm not going to get into details, but the reason my form looks like this is because I was talking about the idea of how in nature, in architecture, there are different surfaces. There's walls, there are floors, there's ceiling, whereas in nature, there are particles that are coming together to form space that a human being can interact in many several different ways. So, you know, doing that study of nature translated into architecture, and then studying the human ergonomics, I developed a particle of my own, using human ergonomics, and then usko istemal karte hue developed my models, and then I started developing my the spatial field within that. Once I had all of that done, I then moved on to my atmosphere. So अब मेरे पास I exactly know कि मेरी spaces आपस में कैसे relate हो रही हैं, उन spaces का form कैसा होगा. Now I'm basically talking about the what the space is going to feel like. What is the sensorial experience of that space. And then जो भी मेरी studies थी, using all of those studies, I started making models, making sketches and everything. तो फिर मैंने उसको अपने atmospherically मैंने उसको study किया. And then all of that. So I'll come back to this slide over here, and um, I'm done over here. So if you guys have any questions about it, or if now, let's say for example, let's talk about तुम लोगों की कौन सी तीन sites हैं? What are your three programs जो main है?
Police station, union council, and post office.
Yeah. So now, for example, if the group of the student who are working with police station, similarly the way I took precedence of Birmingham Youth Center to start calculating and deciding how I'm going to use my demographic analysis into my to develop the number of students I'm developing the space for. तुम लोग किसी भी police station को locally, I don't think locally would be a good idea, because we're never really designing spaces according to the number of people we are catering to. Maybe you can start looking at police stations in India, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and all of those, or maybe somewhere in USA, or a similar context, so that you guys exactly know how to go about it, right? And for people who are, for example, working with union council, they can go to a local union council. They can ask them what are the number of tickets being used on daily basis. जो लोग अपने entry पे आके ticket लेते हैं, and then they wait for their number, तो total वो कितने ले रहे हैं. For example, they say that there are a number of approximately, let's say, 500 people coming in every day. So then you'd start deciding कि अगर 500 लोग दिन पे आ रहे हैं, तो how many public dealing desks are you going to develop? For example, if you develop putting 10 tables, then you are catering to, every table is catering to 100 people. अब वो 100 people को कैसे डील कर रहे हैं? फॉर एग्जाम्पल यू से कि अगर 100 लोग एक टेबल पे आ रहे हैं, तो एक बंदा कितना टाइम ले रहा है उस टेबल पे. लेट्स से 5 minutes. You guys can obviously go to the union council, any for example, cantonment board in Clifton or in DHA or wherever around Karachi, कि per person, for example, एक बंदा कितना time दे रहा है, right? तो they say कि if a person is, let's say, taking 10 minutes, तो 100 लोगों का 10 के साथ multiply करोगे, तो there is a total of 1000 minutes that people are spending in that space. Okay, now that's one study. Now you guys can translate that saying that, for example, अगर मेरा यूनियन काउंसिल सुबह 9 बजे से लेके 5 बजे तक चल रहा है, तो मेरे पास इतने घंटे हैं, 6, 7, 8. My union council is going to function for 8 hours, right? So this is the number of minutes that I have. Up using the number of minutes, you come down to seeing how, the amount of time a single person is using, or requiring to deal with the with uh, on the desk, and then you basically backtrack it. So you need to, like, when you're uh, doing your space relationship diagrams or developing a program in respect to the number of people and spaces that are going to be required, तुम लोग उसमें वो देखोगे कि एक तो कितनी तुम लोगों का कितना टाइम वो चल रहा है. ऑब्वियसली पुलिस स्टेशन में वो ये चीज़ अप्लाई नहीं होगी, राइट? पुलिस स्टेशन वाले जिस तरीके से प्रोग्राम अपना डेवलप करेंगे इज गोइंग टू बी वेरी डिफरेंट to the way union council people are going to do. Similarly, for post office people, they can speak to local post offices and see कि भाई पेंशन वाले लोग कितने आ रहे हैं, what is कि वो लोग कितना टाइम ले रहे हैं, और besides pension उसके अलावा what other tasks they are dealing with, right? और फिर उन सब चीज़ों को तुम लोग इस्तेमाल करके अपने using time, space and dimensions, you'll start developing your space, what do you call it, your program in respect to your space calculations. ठीक है? Is it like, was it helpful? Was it clear? Do you guys have any question? Because I think I'm done. Okay. Why can't you guys unmute yourself? It's so weird. Ask how to unmute. Can you guys unmute yourselves now?
It comes and goes. Like now I can.
Okay, hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is that basically in union councils around here, right, like the local ones, the idea of a union council is still something that people are not used to. People don't actually come to these union councils, so the number or the statistics are very distorted.
There's so
Like we
much
don't know.
background noise, Zara. I can't hear you. I'm so sorry. Is this Tumara question? Is people at the moment don't know about the union council and they don't come to the union council, so the statistics from the local union council distorted on average. If there are 700,000 people we are catering to, you won't really be catering to 700,000 people. देखो ना, एक तो है कि तुम लोगों की लोकेलिटी में कितने लोग हैं. ओके, नाउ लेट्स से कि लेट्स टेक Safi, why don't you just type your answer question in the chat box, and then I'll just answer directly. I don't know why you guys can't unmute your mics. Uh, yeah, okay. Now you guys can unmute yourself. I'm so sorry. I'm really bad at using Zoom.
Okay,
Yeah, so
so
Zara, for your question, yeah. So let's say, okay, so I did not know how a union council works until and unless I had to go to a union council to, basically start. I had to get my degrees attested, and
according to our cousins' readings on. Okay, sorry, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I was just saying that the research that we did, right? So according to Arif Hassan, one union council should cater to 9,500 households, right? And so on average, if you have like families of 5, 6, 7, 8, that comes around like it's a big chunk of number that we're dealing with. Locally, union councils are not being used. People don't want to go there. They are not utilizing them the way they should. They don't even know the facilities that are present there. And a lot of times, union councils are not giving the facilities they're supposed to give the people. So, if we're thinking of an ideal union council, which should cater to this number of people, and a union council which has the facilities which it should, that's like an ideal number, right? So then how do
Seven,
you
you're
come
saying
to a number of
700,000
users?
people,
Because
right?
in our so this is based on the user analysis that we've done, that people reside in our area and not Nazabad, right? That it should cater to.
Okay.
The other thing is out of this number, timing wise also it differs, right? There is a working class which will not be able to come during the working hours, right? then there are women who generally are not coming out, but some might come to the union council if they felt comfortable enough to come to the union council. So the number or the estimate or to figure out कि probability क्या है कितने लोगों की आने की union council की is so like it varies so much, right? So how do we come to this average number? Sorry if I don't know. You can ask me if I'm making sense.
You do make sense. Okay, so you're saying basically your union council that you're designing as is, on an ideal situation is supposed to cater to 700,000 people. That is 7 lakh people, right? But now you need to understand that these 7 lakh or 700,000 people are not going to be going there all at once. They're not going to be going there on one single day. They're going to be obviously हर दिन में भी 100 लोग जा रहे हैं या 500 लोग जा रहे हैं या 600 लोग जा रहे हैं, जो भी जा रहे हैं. अब ये नंबर को जो तुम लोगों को कैलकुलेट करना है ना, उसको तुम लोग इस तरीके से कर सकते हो कि if you guys can speak to the union council and ask them, tell them that you're working on a studio project and tell these guys that कि आप हमें बताएं कि आपके पास डेली बेसिस पे कितने लोग आ रहे हैं, राइट? फॉर एग्जाम्पल गिव अस द स्टैटिस्टिक्स ऑफ 1 वीक. फिर उसमें से तुम लोग एवरेज निकालो and then see if you guys can somehow because you told me that not everyone wants to go to the union council, right? And then if the number of people that are going and then the number of people that are not going, you guys take a ratio out of that, and then if you're actually creating a union council for an ideal situation using the number of people that are currently going, usko, because see, program development and space calculation is all about mathematics, right? So ratios निकालने पड़ेंगे, तुम लोगों को देखना पड़ेगा कि भाई अभी इतने लोग जाते हैं, इतने लोग जाना चाहते हैं, जिसमें से इतने लोग जा रहे हैं. ये दोनों नंबर्स आ गए, उसका रेशियो निकाल दिया. इतने लोगों को केटर करना है, तो उसमें से कितने लोग एक्चुअली में जाएंगे दिन में, उसकी एग्जैक्ट कैलकुलेशन तुम लोगों के पास आ जाएगी यूजिंग फॉर्मूलाज और व्हाटसोएवर. ठीक है ना? तो उससे तुम लोगों को एग्जैक्टली पता चल जाएगा. एंड देन यूजिंग द टाइम रिस्ट्रिक्शंस ऑन डेली बेसिस या हफ्ते, अगर तुम लोग फॉर एग्जांपल डेली बेसिस को नहीं उठाना चाहते तो मे बी यू गाइस कैन मेक योर कैलकुलेशंस ऑन मंथली बेसिस कि एक महीने में कितने लोग जा रहे हैं, and then divide that calculation on weekly basis and then see कि भाई how many people my union council is going to cater to on weekly basis, and then on that analysis you start developing कि भाई मेरे दिन में कितने लोग जाएंगे. Does it make sense, Zara?
You mentioned you mentioned that, like there would be a formula for me to then calculate.
Yeah.
People, right?
Yeah.
That are going to come. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. So saying कि वो क्या होगा in the sense कि मैं like you said कि ideally अगर मैं ये calculation करती हूँ कि मेरी इतनी families हैं, obviously एक बंदा आएगा या 2 लोग आएंगे, या अगर women's council है तो, and ideally if I want, imagining that this place is going to be used by women and women will come and you are going to come and use this space, तो उस हिसाब से मैं अंदाजा लगाऊंगी कि इतने household में इतनी औरतें.
Now for example, if I share my screen with you guys,
let's say if I have ability तो मैं क्या बोलूंगी कि okay I'll
ठीक है,
imagine कि
तुम कह रही
आधे
हो
लोग
कि
आएंगे, 1/3 लोग आएंगे.
let's say अभी तुम कह
How
रही हो
do
कि
I understand
ideal situation है ये, ठीक है ना, कि तुम्हारे 700,000 लोगों को डील करना है. करंटली हम बोल रहे हैं कि 100,000 लोग एक्चुअली में जा रहे हैं, currently going, ठीक है.
So this is data we're saying that we got from a union council जो 100,000 आपने लिखा है.
नहीं, ये मैं अभी मैं ऐसे no that's not a that's just like I'm just like using, अभी तो मैं ऐसी numbers use कर रहा हूँ, तुम लोग obviously अपने पूछ के proper numbers use करना, ठीक है. Because I wouldn't know the numbers, right? So I'm just like telling you how you could actually go about it. Use of
That's
union
the
council. See, for you to analyze the total number of people actually going to the union council and making use of it, वो उससे तुम लोगों को उससे पता चलेगा कि for example तुम उनसे पूछो कि तुम्हारे दिन में कितने लोग आ रहे हैं union council में, ठीक है. वो लोग कह रहे हैं कि हमारे पास for example दिन में 500 टिकट्स होते हैं, 0 से नंबर शुरू होता है. By the end of the day we are for example giving away 500 tickets. You know how a bank
Okay.
works, or
Yeah.
all of these spaces, जितनी भी government institutes होते हैं वो they work on token basis, right? अगर वो लोग कह रहे हैं कि हमारे पास 500 लोग आ रहे हैं दिन में, तो मैं बोलूँगा कि अगर 500 per day है, तो on monthly basis they're dealing with 40 into 500 into 30 people, right? तो महीने में उनके पास let's say
15,000.
15,000 लोग जा रहे हैं, सही है?
Yep.
ठीक है ना? अब अगर तुम कह रही हो कि सात सात 700,000 लोग जा रहे एक्चुअली में केटर करना है, तो ऑब्वियसली हर हाउस
Yep.
होल्ड में से पूरी फैमिली तो नहीं जाएगी ना, ऑब्वियसली
नहीं,
कोई एक
नहीं.
बंदा जा रहा होगा, राइट? तो उसको तुम लोग फिगर आउट करो कि फॉर एग्जांपल
Yeah. Yeah.
if there's 5 people per I'm sure 5 से ज्यादा होंगे, let's say there's 7 people per household, तो actual number of people that are supposed to go there
Yeah.
is 100,000, right? Of which
Right.
15,000 people are going, let's say, depending, obviously 15,000 हमारा वो it's an estimated number, it's an वो जो तुम लोग एग्जैक्टली अपने यूनियन काउंसिल से किसी भी यूनियन काउंसिल से बात करके देख लेना, तो फिर इन नंबर्स को तुम लोग इस्तेमाल करके देख लेना कि कितने लोग एक्चुअली में जा रहे होंगे। अगर तुम लोग एक आइडियल
Right.
सिचुएशन के लिए बना रहे हो, तो तुम लोग के पास नंबर्स आ जाएंगे, एंड देन यू गाइज आर गोइंग टू बैक ट्रैक यूजिंग के वो कितने टिकट्स, फिर अगर एक्चुअली में वो आइडियल सिचुएशन के उस पे बेसिस पे बना हुआ है, तो फिर तुम लोगों को पता चल जाएगा कितने लोग जा रहे हैं, एंड देन देखोगे मंथली बेसिस में कितने जा रहे हैं, फिर वो डेली बेसिस में कितने जाएंगे, एंड देन यूजिंग दैट नंबर यू डिसाइड कि तुम लोगों की कितनी स्पेसेस होंगी। लेट्स से कि एक तुम लोगों का होगा एग्जीक्यूटिव लोगों के लिए, वो इतने लोग जा रहे हैं, फिर एक पब्लिक डीलिंग होगी जो हो सकता है देयर इज अ विंडो आउटसाइड द यूनियन काउंसिल, and then there is
Yep.
executive for who you're creating halls within the वो, तो executive का भी obviously 6 ही काउंटर होंगे, and then बाहर वालों के भी around 12 काउंटर होंगे and everything, because obviously there are a fewer number of people who will be using the executive
Yeah.
services, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
basically you'll have to develop your formulas yourself, taking the numbers that you're you
Getting
have, or
right
you will,
now
yeah,
from the
exactly, yeah,
current. Yeah. And
yeah.
ideal, I जो आप ideal वाली बात कर रहे थे, like you have resorted to a precedent study, like
Yeah.
you've kind of connected that and the number of people that are there. So you think that that would be a good way for us to also
Yeah,
gauge? Yeah.
obviously that'll be a great way, because अगर तुम लोग देखो ना, for me it was a real challenge to decide कि मैं कितने लोगों के लिए बनाऊं, because the problem was, you know, the reason why Jamshoro is called the University of Cities is because there is a very large number of students that live there, पढ़ने जाते and everything, right? Now imagine dealing with, इतने सारे बच्चे, and then at the end designing only for 450 students at one time is a huge difference, right? But then it only makes sense because obviously ये पूरे जितने बच्चों के लिए मैं design कर रहा हूँ 140 let's say approximately
Yeah.
150,000 students,
Yeah.
they're not going to be going there all at once. कभी किसी की क्लासेस हो रही होंगी, कभी कोई कहाँ पे होगा, कभी कोई यूनिवर्सिटी के कैफेटेरिया में होगा. There will be like, the idea is that at one time there are going to be 450 students in the youth center हर वक्त. तो मैंने I had designed those that spaces in a way कि अगर 450 students जा रहे हैं, तो उसमें से let's say 50 students library में होंगे, 60 students are going to be in the football court, right? 70 students are going to be in the laboratories, 200 students are going to be in recreational spaces that have all of these facilities, 100 students are going to be in the cafeteria of the youth center. तो वो थोड़ा सा obviously तुम लोगों थोड़ा सा वो you know it's not going to be exact, but it'll be somewhere close to what it should be like.
Can I ask a
वो मुझसे
question
बात कर.
or some? Okay. So,
Uh,
Khizer, I'm in the police station. What's particular about the site is that हमारी जो site है उसकी कोई 1 किलोमीटर के रेडियस में 2 और पुलिस स्टेशन आ जाते हैं, एंड देन देयर इज अ थर्ड पुलिस स्टेशन एट 2.7 kilometers. And visiting a Nazmabad police station is not in the cards for us because we don't have any contacts or such, and different vicinities में different needs होती हैं police stations की, और उसके हिसाब से vary करता है. So we were struggling a bit with how we should allocate program and space, and how does that affect the number of users that would use that particular police station, उसके हिसाब.
Yeah, saying that you guys don't have context to somehow come in contact with police, and coming up ke pata chale कि वो कितने लोगों के साथ वो deal करें and everything, that is something that I can't help you with. But I mean, if you guys can somehow figure out कि वो for example, agar obviously मुझे I am not very aware of what's the population like of Nazmabad and all of that. I'm going to talk to you in respect to defense because that's where I live. अगर मैं for example defense में एक police station बना रहा होता somewhere around दरक्षा थाना and वो सब कुछ, सबसे पहले मैं ये करता कि मैं दरक्षा थाने को properly in detail study करता, right? मैं देखता कि दरक्षा थाने में currently कितने lockups हैं, how many police officers are sitting there, how many mobiles are they using to go on a round on daily basis, how many mobiles are parked outside their police station at all times. ठीक है ना? जब मेरे पास वो सब चीजें आ जाएंगी, then I'll correlate all of these, this entire analysis and all these statistics with respect to the population of the area. ठीक है ना? And then using a precedence over the internet, maybe because it's always best to use something that is regionally or contextually relevant. तो मैं देखता कि इंडिया में, or for example, because Ahmedabad and Mumbai and all of these places are quite well developed, तो उनकी जो statistics होंगी वो would obviously be correct compared to any other space, right? तो मैं उनको स्टडी करता कि भाई अगर अहमदाबाद में या फॉर एग्जांपल मुंबई में कोई पुलिस स्टेशन है तो उसके कितने लॉकअप्स हैं कंपेयर टू द पॉपुलेशन ऑफ मुंबई. ठीक है ना? उसका रेशियो निकाल के I'd compare that ratio in regards to the population of defense and दरक्षा थाने, ताकि मुझे पता चले कि is दरक्षा थाने being able to cater to the right number of people, or is it comparatively a smaller police station. And अब क्योंकि मैं इन दरक्षा थाने की vicinity में ही बना रहा हूँ, and for example दरक्षा थाना is catering to only 30% of what is actually needed, तो मेरा जो पुलिस स्टेशन होगा वो फिर 70% लोगों को cater करेगा, because दरक्षा is already catering to 30.
Okay. All
Right?
right. So,
Yeah.
like at the moment, we have access to seniors in which they covered Nazmabad police station, which is 2.7 kilometers from our side. And the data that we have from there is that Nazmabad police station basically deals with 12,000 square feet and 150,000 people. And so, like, we have this data. So, like, do you suggest that we mark out radar that it's going
Now
to
for
cover?
example now
But
for example मेरी जो site है, और like for example तुम कह रहे हो तुम्हारी site है and then उसके around 2.5 kilometers के radius को cater कर रहा है, right?
yeah.
ठीक है ना? तो फिर मैं क्या करूंगा कि vicinity में मैं residential area निकालूंगा, एंड अगर इरेगुलर रेजिडेंशियल एरिया भी है, रेगुलर रेजिडेंशियल एरिया भी है फॉर एग्जांपल, तो मैं पहले देखूंगा जो रेगुलर रेजिडेंशियल एरिया है उसमें पर 500 स्क्वायर यार्ड्स कितने लोग रह रहे हैं. ठीक है ना? एंड देन आई टेक अ रेशियो आउट इन कंपैरिजन टू कि भाई वो मेरा रेगुलर सेटलमेंट्स का कितनी एरिया को कवर कर रहा है, और फिर मैं निकाल दूंगा कि ओके दिस इज द नंबर ऑफ पीपल दैट आर लिविंग विद इन द विसिनिटी ऑफ माई पुलिस स्टेशन इन रेगुलर सेटलमेंट्स. ठीक है ना? फिर मैं अपनी कैलकुलेशन निकालूंगा इरेगुलर सेटलमेंट्स की, अगर वो वहाँ पे हैं मैं करूँगा कि भाई लेट्स से कि 500 स्क्वायर यार्ड्स के एरिया में कितने इरेगुलर सेटलमेंट्स में लोग रह रहे हैं, लेट्स से 20, तो फिर मैं उसको मल्टीप्लाई करूँगा total area of irregular settlements within the radii of 2.5 या जो कुछ भी है, right? तो उससे मुझे exactly नंबर पता चल जाएगा, नॉट एग्जैक्ट नंबर बट अप्रोक्सीमेटली वेरी क्लोज टू बीइंग राइट कि कितने लोग उसकी विसिनिटी में रह रहे हैं. ठीक है? तो मुझे पता चल जाएगा कि इतने लोगों को मुझे केटर करना है. वन. ठीक है ना? नाउ इफ यू गाइज डोंट वांट टू लुक एट इंटरनेशनल प्रेसिडेंसीज फॉर योर स्पेस कैलकुलेशन, तुम कराची में ही किसी और एरिया में जो प्रॉपर फंक्शनिंग पुलिस स्टेशन हो, ऐसा हो नहीं सकता कि ना हो, उसको उठाओ, जो मे बी यू गाइज कैन लुक अप द पुलिस स्टेशन दैट कुलेस डिजाइन, एंड देन उसको देखो कि वो कितने रेडियस के लोगों को केटर कर रहा है, और व्हाट इज द रेशियो और परसेंटेज ऑफ पीपल depending upon the number of people that are living around it. ठीक है ना? तो उससे तुम लोगों को एग्जैक्टली पता चल जाएगा कि तुम्हें कितना वो करना है. एंड देन वंस यू हैव ऑल ऑफ दिस, you're going to go to you'd start using टाइम सेवर स्टैंडर्ड्स. ऑब्वियसली पुलिस स्टेशन के भी होंगे, यूनियन काउंसिल, सब चीज़ों के होंगे. ऐसी कोई चीज़ नहीं है कि जिसके टाइम सेवर स्टैंडर्ड्स ना हो. उसमें से तुम लोग देखोगे कि पर पर्सन तुम लोगों को कितनी स्पेस चाहिए, एंड देन पर पर्सन की स्पेस को इस्तेमाल करके यू विल मल्टीप्लाई दैट विद द टोटल नंबर ऑफ पीपल एक्चुअली यूजिंग दैट स्पेस. तो उससे तुम लोगों को एग्जैक्टली पता चल जाएगा कि तुम लोगों की उसकी स्केल ऑफिस पुलिस स्टेशन का या यूनियन काउंसिल का क्या होगा.
Okay, makes sense.
And I mean, like, it is very much possible that, on your first study, you might have a wrong number. Just for example, Zara ne bola tha ki 700,000 log को cater करना है, but it's obvious not all 7,000 people are going to go there anyways. हर household में से एक ही बंदा जाएगा, वो एक बंदा भी वही होगा जो अपनी किसी ऑफिस में काम कर रहा है, तो वो अपनी ऑफिस से उठ के यूनियन काउंसिल में लंच ब्रेक में चला जाएगा. So you have to basically start thinking about all of these things to make sure that the number you're coming up with is the right number. And then wait, when you're presenting this, make sure you don't go into all of these details. These details are for you only. For jury, you're just going to show them कि भाई this is the number. जैसे there is a lot of study that I had done when I was developing my youth center, और उसकी जब मैं studies कर रहा था. But in my presentation, I had only shown them this. इतना शो किया था मैंने कि भाई ये है टोटल नंबर, एंड ब्रिमिंघम को मैंने एज ए प्रेसिडेंस लिया, उसमें से मैंने ये नंबर निकाला है बस. सो दे नो कि मैंने इमेजिनेटिव या मैंने सोच के नहीं निकाल दिया कि मुझे 450 लोगों के लिए चाहिए. आई हैव बिन थ्रू अ प्रोसेस एंड I've developed myself a way to basically come to these numbers.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Safi has a question. I think that's going to be a last one, or does anyone have?
I
Any
have
Khizer,
a
you ended
question.
up answering my question with Zara, so
Okay, cool, great. Javeria.
Okay, so my question is, like, obviously, like, we've already discussed how to come up with a number of users for the police station, but a lot of us are designing public spaces that go along with our police stations, and the hope is that other people then are going to come and utilize that space. So, like, how does one come up with a number for just open public spaces for that?
Again, up the thing is, when you're designing a public space in your specified site, you can't cater to the number of public that is living in your vicinity, because in Pakistan, in India, all of the subcontinent, where basically people in Karachi, like let's just say Karachi, the way we are living is not the ideal situation, right? We live in a very densely populated area, so you can never cater to the right number of people. So for example, if you guys are designing a public space besides your main program, so your main program becomes the primary base for your space calculation, right? एक दफा तुम लोगों को जब उसकी पता चल जाएगी कि ये space calculation है, तो बाकी जितनी space remaining होगी, वो obviously that is what you have for your public space, right? You can't add up more. You can't compromise your main function to give more space to public function or whatever your secondary function is. ठीक है, तो वो उस हिसाब से हो जाएगा. And for example, if your secondary function or program is not a public function, but it's something like, for example, if someone's designing, just saying out of the blue, if someone's designing a police station slash a kindergarten, for example, तो उसके लिए फिर ये होगा कि अब रिमेनिंग स्पेस मेरे पास इतनी है. अगर मैं फॉर एग्जांपल पुलिस स्टेशन के साथ किंडरगार्टन बना रहा हूँ, तो फिर उसकी अलग कैलकुलेशंस निकलेंगी, एंड देन you're basically going to see the ratio how everything works out on your site उसके हिसाब से.
Khizer, do you think it's unrealistic if we suggest programs like parks or playgrounds next to our police station? Like, we're trying to challenge the existing status quo, right, between the police and the community, where there's a lot of fear and a lot of stigma, and community relations are really bad. But introducing these programs, when you get comments in your kids like, "Kid, nahi yahan pe kaun se bacche aayenge?" Like, we're not comfortable sending our kids there, or so. Like, how do you think we should go about this challenge?
Yeah. Now, for example, इन हाइपोथेटिकल सिचुएशन मैं बोलता हूँ कि मेरी मैं जहाँ पे पुलिस स्टेशन बना रहा हूँ, फॉर एग्जांपल आई एम जस्ट पुटिंग अ हाइपोथेटिकल सिचुएशन, उसके बाजू में एक हॉस्पिटल है, लेट्स से there is a hospital, and then kahin or kareeb mein koi और function hai, right? So I know the public or people from around the city who are coming into my vicinity are people who are sick or people who are coming to meet their sick people or their patients. So they are in my vicinity, right? So whatever program or whatever park I'm designing, I'm going to design whatever public space I'm designing, I'm going to design it in respect to the user that is coming around my site or who's already there. ठीक है, तो अगर फॉर एग्जांपल मैं एक ऐसा पार्क बना रहा हूँ जो is catering to the public or to the people who are also coming to the hospital, then the park is basically going to be designed in a way that it caters to waiting spaces, and that park, you know, is designed in a way that it you know, it helps you with, you know, different health key, you know, it has different health benefits, being, you know, using a sensorial experience or, you know, whatever just bhi tarike se, right? So you need to understand what are the active, we're going to get back to that. You, before proposing your secondary program, you need to understand what your active networks on site are like. तो उसके अगर तुम लोग ऑब्वियसली जो साइट में एक्टिविटीज हो रही हैं उसके हिसाब से अगर तुम लोग कर रहे हो तो बेसिकली यू आर गिविंग बैक टू द कम्युनिटी ओवर देयर, राइट? यू कांट बी लाइक के
Yeah.
मेरा पुलिस स्टेशन है और यहाँ पे रेजिडेंसेज हैं तो मैं बच्चों के लिए पार्क बना रही हूँ. मे बी वहाँ पे द प्लेस इज नॉट सो सिक्योर, मे बी ओल्ड पीपल come out of their houses way more than बच्चे. So you need to understand कि जो active network है तुम लोगों के site पे around the whole thing, what that network is like, and then you're going to
Hmm.
basically intervene that network with the network, the active network of your site.
Hmm. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? Okay, chalo. I hope it helped you guys. I will send the recording to you guys once वो पूरी render हो जाएगी. ठीक है? Good luck. Bye.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for the this help.
Thank you.